Regan Slaymaker for International Boxing News. I have the pleasure to be joined by boxing manager Charlie Sims. Charlie, how are you today, mate?
I'm good, Regan. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Obviously, in the lead up to Christmas, I thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to kind of do a kind of end of year review of sort of all the fighters in your stable. I thought we'd start with obviously the world champ Joe Cordina. Obviously, this year kind of reclaimed his title that he never really lost against Shavkat Rakhimov in a fight of the year, and then defended recently against Edward Vasquez in Monaco. I mean, all in all, a very successful year for Joe Cordina.
Yeah, very busy year. I think it was important that he got two really good fights under his belt. He's obviously had that injury, that hand injury, which kind of postponed things earlier on in his pro career, and then we managed to get to the peak and get to the world title against Ogawa, and then obviously he injured his hand again whilst training for Rakhimov. So it was good to kind of get those two fights in 2023. So I thought Rakhimov was a really tough fight, really tough customer. I think Joe did really, really well in that fight. I think he showed everybody that he is definitely, arguably, the best in the division. I think Vasquez it was one of those where we were kind of looking for a voluntary, but we had our eyes and our minds, and the plan was set on doing a unification. And we just couldn't find that unification. And Vasquez obviously stepped in. It was in Monaco, which is, if you've ever been to one of the shows in Monaco, it's a very different atmosphere to most events. You know, you don't get that kind of that vibe or connection with the audience. So I think there was a lot of things missing in that fight, and I think also, preparation for that fight maybe didn't go as smoothly as we would have liked, but he got through it, and he got a good win on what probably you would say was a bad night for Joe Cordina. But again, very important for him to stay busy and carry the momentum into going into a unification fight, which is obviously the plan for 2024. Division's it's busy. It's good at the moment. Navarrette has said that he's injured, but he's in and around one of the names that we'd like to target if he's back in the mix for 2024. O'Shaquie Foster is staying busy. There could be a potential fight with him. I know Matchroom went and met with Top Rank this week to discuss options with Foster and Navarrete for Cordina, and what that would look like in Cardiff and what that would look like stateside. So that's kind of been busy. And I think one of the most interesting champions to come out recently is Lamont Roach and his win. He's a free agent, from what I'm hearing, so it should be fairly easy to make a unification fight with somebody like Lamont Roach. So let's see what 2024 brings, but I think there's some really interesting fights for Joe. I think his plans are really to unify in the next fight and potentially move up to 135 and have one of those monster fights with one of the big names in that division.
Definitely, obviously, you mentioned there obviously Navarrete and Ashaki Foster are the two of the names obviously with Top Rank. And obviously Lamont Roach being the free agent. Obviously, we know that Eddie has made fights with Top Rank before, but obviously, boxing being boxing, the fight with the free agent always seems a bit more likely. Would you say Lamont Roach is the most likely unification out of those three, or would you say they have equal chance of coming off?
Well, I think Lamont Roach is being lured in with the Gervonta Davis fight at the moment. So he could potentially go up, fight against Gervonta Davis, and still retain his title at 130. So I think he's kind of being lured in with that opportunity right now. And to be honest with you, Lamont Roach is probably at the back end of his career. You know, he's done certainly well to win a world title, but he's going to be looking for those big paydays. So he wants the biggest fights. I think for us, it would be the easiest option in terms of trying to make a deal, trying to make a fight if he's a free agent. But it just depends. It just depends what's on the table and what's best for Lamont Roach and what's best for Cordina. I think personally, the Navarrete fight would have been the best fight for us. He's arguably the second best in the division, and I think it would have been good to put one and two together and have that kind of big unification fight, whether that be in the States, or they come over to Cardiff. So I don't know. Like, we'll see what happens. We couldn't really make the O'Shaquie Foster fight. We did enter negotiations for that before, when he was with Matchroom. He had a very short stint with Matchroom, and we just couldn't get it over the line. And it was in Cardiff, and it just wasn't really working. And we tried to look at the States, and Shaki Foster just isn't a big enough name to headline in the States. So it was making it commercially difficult for us to make a fight with him. I think Navarrette, definitely we can do a fight in the States with him. Yeah, I was on Shaki Foster and just it not being commercially viable. But Navarrete definitely is. And I think Lamont Roach, probably in Cardiff, makes sense.
Definitely, obviously. Would that be at the castle, obviously? I know, or at the stadium. I know Joe's kind of mentioned his next fight, he wants it to be the maximum amount of money and kind of the maximum amount of reward as well. Obviously, he's talking about financial security for his family as well. Would that be most likely a stadium fight for Joe?
I mean, the castle's a lot bigger than what we've been targeting before. And for me, the castles of I think you'd have to go into a big domestic fight. I think the Lee Wood fight was the obvious fight for that. We're just hearing rumors that Lee Wood doesn't want to fight Cordina and that he's chasing down the Josh Warrington fight. So that was the obvious route to try and do that fight there. I think if it's not going to be there, then we have to try and bring a unification over. I'm not sure Lamont Roach will sell out the castle. He might do. It's a conversation that we need to have and discuss. But I think right now, the main priority to get to do is if we can't get a huge domestic fight over the line, is to get this unification done.
100%, and I look forward to seeing it. And I think Joe Cordina definitely deserves that unification shot, even when he knocked out Agara as well. Obviously, I do want to move on to the Gorilla, John Ryder. Obviously, only one fight this year, but I mean, huge fight in May against Canelo Alvarez, and obviously, he impressed a lot. He impressed a lot of people. He went at he. I think the scorecards were disgraceful to John, to be honest, but he proved a lot of people wrong in that ring against Canelo in May.
100%. And that was such a great experience. I think everything was against us from the moment we signed the agreement, but it's one of those opportunities that you just can't pass up and that may never present itself again. So, we've been talking about fighting Canelo probably, I don't know how many years before, 3 or 4 years before that fight even came around, and we was targeting him, trying to fight him, and there was some setbacks, and then there was some moments where Billy Joe Saunders was going to pull out at one point, and we were on call, and John flew over to Texas for that just in case. And there was an opportunity straight after the Callum Smith fight where it was like, Canelo's looking for his next opponent, and who could it potentially be, and our name was in the mix for that. So there's been times where we were close, but we weren't really close enough. So to kind of get that big win against Zach Parker, become the interim champion, become mandatory, we got him into position where John Ryder had to be recognised, and it kind of worked nice. It kind of worked out well for John. Obviously, he got a great payday out of it, and he got his opportunity to mix it with one of the best, not only in the division, but one of the best of our era, pound for pound. And everybody was kind of writing John off before that, and the media was saying this is going to be an easy fight. The Mexicans were like, this is a 3 or 4 round job. And he got in there, and it was a tough night. The broken nose didn't help with anything, but he showed heart, he showed resilience, he showed that he wanted to be in there right through to the final bell, and that he was going to give it everything. And he won a lot of people's hearts that night. And I think one of the biggest things that came out of Guadalajara was John Ryder becoming a true warrior. And now he's put himself right back in the mix with a fight with Jaimie Munguia. Jaimie Munguia is kind of in that position where John was, where he's kind of chasing this Canelo fight, trying to figure out how to get himself in position, what kind of fights can he take to show that he deserves a shot against Canelo. And he obviously thinks that John Ryder's a fight that he can win, and a fight that's going to put him in line to fight Canelo and get a shot. But we have other plans, and this fight with Jaimie Munguia as well, this has kind of been brewing around for a while. This wasn't just an off the cuff, oh, do you want to fight Jaimie Munguia? And it was like, yeah, okay. So we've been talking about this fight a couple of times, and again, it never really come off. We ended up going down different routes, and so did Jaimie Munguia. But now we've kind of come back together, and we made that fight fairly quickly. Actually, it kind of got agreed. and the contract got agreed within days of receiving it. Golden Boy was super aggressive to make that fight, and I think so were we. So I think it's a really interesting fight. I think John obviously fancies it. He really wants to. He's wanted this fight. He really thinks he's going to win. I think it's a big banana skin for Munguia. I don't think he needed to take this fight. There was a lot of talk about him maybe matching up against Canelo in May, and if that is the case, fighting John in the end of January just seems a bit risky business to me. But it's on. It's signed, sealed, and we just need to deliver in Arizona, Phoenix on Jan 27th.
Definitely, obviously, there are a lot of talks that kind of these negotiations with Jaimie Munguia and Canelo for May, as you said. Do you think there's a slight hint of them maybe overlooking John, maybe?
Definitely, they're going to see this as I would probably say as a benchmark to, I think John went 12 rounds with Canelo. They're going to probably try and knock John out. That's probably their plan. Because if they do that, they make a huge statement. And then it's a huge fight with them and Canelo. But as we know, John isn't easy to hit, first of all. Secondly, he's extremely strong and he's extremely tough. He's defensively very good. So I think Munguia is going to really struggle. I think his style also is made for John. Just the way he comes forward, he's very aggressive. He's also tall. He's like 6 foot tall. And we've seen John in with bigger men. And I just feel like everything kind of works nicely for John. He's fancied the fight. He's talked about it. He's visioned it in his mind for a long time. So he knows how he's going to approach it. He knows what's to come. I just think everybody that gets in with John, he's a lot harder to deal with than what people first think. And I think Munguia and their team have probably underestimated how good he is. So it's going to be really interesting in one of them fights where we've got everything to gain from this. So it's, we're going to go into enemy territory. We're going to go over to Phoenix. We're going to be on a Golden Boy show and away show as the away fighter. And we're going to show that there's still some bite in the dog with John Ryder and that he's coming to get himself back into position.
Definitely. I've got a question here. Do you think is John maybe guaranteed that I think third world title shot against what, a Canelo or someone else with a win against Jaimie Munguia? Do you think that would be next?
I think it would be very tough to get the Canelo fight again. Like if we won, I think it'd be very tough. However, what you are going to gain is you're going to gain the top dog position of being technically mandatory to a Canelo. I think you're going to get the big boys in and around the division who can't get the shot with Canelo wanting to fight. And those fights are still very, very big. So that's what we're kind of looking for now. You never know what's going to happen. Like, could Canelo potentially vacate? Or, could Canelo and somebody else fight and Canelo gets beat and then they have to vacate because of the mandatories? Possibly. I do love Undisputed, and I do love what it brings to these divisions. It brings a number one champion. But unfortunately, for everybody else, it's really a big waiting game. And like, there years just go by where you're kind of sitting in position. Like, look at Benavidez now, how long he's waited. And Munguia has waited a while. Some of these fighters are just sitting number one and they just don't get their shot. So I think we could do with the division opening up again. And that's really going to be either Canelo vacates or somebody comes in and takes that number one position, which could be a Benavidez or somebody like that. When he eventually gets his shot, he might beat Canelo, and then he probably has plans to go up to 175, and then it could open up. So it's just about getting yourself in position and letting the opportunities come to you. I think this is the hardest. This is, in terms of all of my experience of working in boxing, where John Ryder is currently positioned right now is a very, very tough position, because you've come off the back of a very good loss against Canelo. And whichever way you want to look at it, it was a loss. And a loss doesn't put you in a good position with anybody, certainly the governing bodies. So he doesn't want to come back against anybody and have a warm-up. He doesn't want to come back against anybody who's a prospect and who's looking to make a name for himself. So ultimately, you have to come back and fight somebody who's a top contender and who's going to be hunting for that number one spot themselves. And that's a waiting game. We did this with Danny Jacobs. When we were waiting for that fight to come around, we would kind of come off the back of the Callum Smith fight, and then all of a sudden you kind of trying to look for that next big fight to put you in position. Danny Jacobs come along, and we both made that fight, and now we're in a similar position with Munguia. So, we've worked it, we've done it the way that we wanted to do it. We've made things happen, and now he's going to get his chance to put himself back in position. And yeah, like I said earlier, this is definitely a banana skin for Jaimie Munguia.
It definitely is, and I think I don't think people are seeing this as a clear-cut Jaimie Munguia win in the boxing world. I think a lot of people are giving John, and rightly so, a massive chance as well. I do want to move on to Conor Benn. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk around the Chris Eubank fight falling through. I want to get onto that in a minute, but he finally returned to the ring in September against Rodolfo Orozco. And I mean, as a part of Team Ben, obviously after this amount of time out of the ring, it must have been incredibly satisfying to see Conor back in there, winning and winning well as well in a unanimous decision win.
Yeah, pretty frustrating 18 months. Obviously, there's been a lot going on behind the scenes, which most of it's been made aware publicly, but some of it hasn't. And there's still a lot to come. So very, very difficult 18 months for him, very frustrating. Obviously, he's been fighting his case, and it was just time to get out and start getting active again. He hadn't boxed for 18 months, and he was obviously looking to make that Eubank fight, and he's looking to make that transition to 160. So, we made that fight at 154. He was huge, Adolfo. Like, he was huge. In real life. I remember getting there, actually. I flew from LA to Florida. The team were already there. And I got there pretty late at night. It was probably about Thursday night. And I was sitting down at dinner with my dad. And we were just catching up, just having a chat. And I was like, have you seen Conor Benn's opponent yet? And he was like, yeah, I've seen him. And I said, what does he look like? And he said, well, we see him at the press conference. He's massive. So I was like, oh, right, okay. And he's like, actually, he's walking along here. I can see him over there. Anyway, all of a sudden, he's walking along. This bloke is massive, like actually massive. Like, I'm 6 foot, but this guy was big. He was bigger than me. So I was like, oh, right, okay, well, is he any good then or what? Because we didn't have a lot of footage of him. And my dad's like, well, yeah, this is going to be a hard night's work for Conor. I don't think this is going to be easy at all. And he was like, traditional Mexican is going to come forward, probably hard as nails. So I was like, okay, well, let's see how we get on. Anyway, we get into the ring. First couple of rounds, 2-3 rounds, I'm like, this is going to be an easy night's work. He's catching him flush. Conor Benn can punch like a donkey kicks. Like, this isn't going to go. This isn't going to get to the halfway point. No way. Caught him in like the 3rd or 4th round, I think. Couldn't finish him at the time, but I was like, this is literally just a matter of time before this fight's over. God, he was like the Terminator, that guy. He didn't stop coming forward. I don't know what that guy, well, we do know what that guy was on, but like, it was crazy, the shots he was taking, flush. And like, I watched it back on TV and you can see the shots, but when you're there in real life and you're hearing the lever hit somebody flush on the chin like that, and you're listening to the sounds of the body shots go in, I still don't know how on earth he stood up for 10 rounds. And he kept walking forward as well. It was insane. One of the most insane fights I've actually watched live. But it was a hard night's work for Conor, and I think he needed it. He needed to get the rust off, and he needed to understand what it was like going in against a bigger man who he was really a 160 fighter, that guy. If you looked at him, I don't know how he made 154, but he was definitely a 160 fighter. And it kind of gave Conor Benn a good benchmark as to what was to come for Eubank, what he needs to do differently. Very, very interesting fight just to watch, but it was good. It was good for Conor. He got out. He was active again. Kind of went a little bit under the radar because we kind of hopped on somebody else's undercards, but we needed to get active, and we needed to, we were lining up the December 23rd date with Eubank, so we needed to get out and get some rust off. and make that fight. But as we all know, and as we've all seen publicly over the last 48 hours, the Eubank fight's pretty much dead. So, which is a shame, because we was looking for that big Tottenham Stadium fight, Feb 3rd. It was going to be a monstrous event. I think it would have blown the original one completely out of the water in terms of the atmosphere, and the feelings that they probably have towards each other would have been very different. I think in the first fight, it was very much a legacy thing. And I think they're both their dads were obviously rivals at some point, and then they felt there was some unfinished business, certainly from the Benn side, and they wanted to kind of put things right, and that's where that kind of animosity came from. But in this fight, they do not like each other. Conor Benn has not liked anything that Eubank has had to say across this situation, and I think it would have been a very, very different environment come fight week, very different atmosphere, and very different feelings towards him on fight night. So, with that being said, it's pretty unfortunate we won't get to see it on Feb 3rd at this stage, but you never know. We'll see what happens. I think for us, it's very important. Like, we've been having some really big team talks. Very important for us just to kind of keep momentum going and staying busy. We can't really wait around. We've put a lot of pressure on Matchroom to deliver us another big fight for February the 3rd. We're not prepared to wait any longer. We had a couple of opponents that were presented to us for March. I think Mario Barrios was one of them for the WBC interim, but we don't want to wait. We just want to fight in Feb, and then we want the summer to open up, and that's probably where we're going to see Conor Benn have another huge fight, whether that's Eubank if it comes back around, whether that's Devin Haney. There's a lot of talk over the last few days of Devin Haney coming over to the UK and fighting at 147. One of those fights are definitely going to open up. Boots Ennis was another fight that was presented to us, but again, February didn't work. So big fights for Conor Benn in and around the 147 division.
Definitely. So, am I right in saying, obviously, you mentioned Barrios there. Obviously, Haney's obviously just fought, so he'll obviously be pushed back later as well. For that February date, it won't be the Mario Barrios, Devin Haney kind of boots in us. Those will be later on in the year.
Right. So we're still looking for a big name, whether it's going to be a top 5 contender or somebody who's going to give us the opportunity that we need to push on in 147. I think the realism is that we're probably going to fight for a world title. Conor Benn wants to go as early as end of April, May. And I think even that probably feels a bit late for him. But I think that's realistically getting a fight in Feb, and then Feb, March, April, May, probably going to go again. So he also wants to get the right preparation. He hasn't made 147 for a while. So he wants to make sure that he can get down, make the weight, feel comfortable, feel strong, and then go again in the early spring, summer, and get that big fight.
Perfect. And kind of obviously we kind of skimmed over the Eubank Jr. kind of situation. But what did you kind of make of it? Obviously, it was this massive fight. As you were saying, you guys were all kind of looking forward to that Eubank Jr. fight. And then it comes out that he's pursuing the IBO world title at middleweight. Was that fairly frustrating to see that he's gone from kind of this mega fight, mega money, mega opportunity to going to a title that he's already won before against an opponent that kind of not many people know about? Or were you guys, we're Team Ben, we don't care about what Eubank Jr. does?
I think the realism is that it all comes down to money. And for Eubank Jr., he was asking for a ridiculous figure, guaranteed, which everybody knows when you do pay-per-view, you're kind of riding off the back of how well it does, right? That's what pay-per-view model is. So to ask for a huge guarantee with hardly any pay-per-view upside, it just doesn't really make financial sense, and it just doesn't work logistically. So, we got ourselves into position. We knew what we were dealing with. We were happy with our figures. And we knew what the fight was capable of doing in terms of pay-per-view. And we were ready to do that. But he wanted it all guaranteed, which is not really a good sign in terms of like when you're negotiating and you're saying, well, I want it all guaranteed. I don't really want to take the upside of the pay-per-view. I get that you want as much guaranteed as possible. We thought our side to get as much guaranteed as possible too. But ultimately, the pay-per-view model is the upside, and you have to kind of know where a fight commercially is going to range. So we had a pretty good idea of where it was going to land, and we were happy with that. But I mean, I see some stuff come out today in the Mirror where it said that it was really down to him and potentially losing his license. I don't think that was the case at all. I think he was pretty motivated by the money and trying to make this fight financially work for him and trying to squeeze as much as possible out of Matchroom. And it just didn't work out that way. And I think for everybody, it was kind of like, we've given him a deadline. We've given him the final offer about 3 times. And this is it. There's nothing else we can do. And if we can't make the fight happen on these numbers, the fight logistically for everybody just doesn't happen. And unfortunately, money just doesn't grow on trees. It's got to come from somewhere. And if it isn't there, it isn't there. And I don't really know what kind of money you're going to get to fight for an IBO title. It's probably not going to be anywhere near what you'd get to fight a natural 147, in Tottenham Stadium. So it was very disappointing to get that far. I think had we known more earlier on in the negotiations, then we probably would have moved on quicker. So, we found some of this stuff out later towards the end of the negotiation, which kind of was disappointing. But I think there was a lot of motivation from everybody else in, Matchroom, Satterland's, DAZN to make this fight. And obviously it didn't happen. So I think for us, actually trying to do the right thing for your fighter is probably the most important thing. And what we've sat down and spoke to Conor Benn about is like, yes, the money is good to fight Chris Eubank Jr. on Feb 3rd. But the realism is that you're so young and you've got a lot of time to make good money. And really, if you look at the momentum that we could keep building, you could make all of that money back in the next however many fights, probably 2024, if he has a good 2024. So I think for Eubank, he has to look at his options and say, well, how many opportunities am I going to get to make this amount of money? And I think for us, we have to look at how many opportunities are we going to get to make this amount of money. And I think Conor Benn by far has the better options. So that's what we need to do. We have to keep moving forward and we have to keep momentum going and we have to keep pushing towards fighting for a world title. I don't know what Chris is going to do. If he's going to go for that IBO, he removed himself from the WBO mandatory position. He might be open to fighting Kell Brook. I don't really know if Kell was going to fight him. I can't see Brook Eubank, personally. I think Kell would rather fight Conor Benn. Just feels more natural to probably his weight. They're both probably at 154. I just don't think Kell wants to fight Eubank at 160. So we'll see.
Definitely. Could Kell be an option for that February 3rd date for Conor?
He's not going to be ready for February 3rd, but he will be for the summer. Definitely. So it could be a case that we go and fight at 147 February the 3rd, and then we look at making a Brook fight in the summer, which is an option for us.
That would be huge.
Huge fight. And it would generate really, really good numbers. So this is what I'm saying. When you look at Conor Benn's options, you've got Kell Brook, Devin Haney, Barrios, Boots. All of these guys are generating big money, all of them, whether you're fighting them in the UK or the United States, you go to Vegas or whatever. So for us, it's like, how many of those fights do we need to make back the kind of Eubank money that we were getting? Not many. So I don't know who realistically Eubank can fight to generate that kind of money that he was getting to fight Conor Benn. Probably not going to get a lot to fight for the IBO. Does Janabek really generate that kind of money commercially? Probably not. Who else is in and around that division?
Carlos Adames, I think he's got the WBC, isn't he? I think Danny Garcia is moving up to middleweight.
Garcia's a big name. I mean, I'm talking about commercially, who's making the most money commercially. Like Adamez is a good fighter, but he's relatively not a big name yet. You know, Garcia definitely is a bigger name. I'm just not sure. Like, does realistically does that sell out the O2 like Garcia, Eubank? So I don't know. He's got some options, but I just don't know what options generate that sort of money. But that's his prerogative and not mine. And he's got his own team advising him, and we've got to do what's best for Conor Benn, and we're not prepared to wait. And I have actually been saying this for the last couple of weeks that we need to move on, and we need to get back on track and forget about the Eubank fight and just move into doing something between 147 and 154, which currently is the plan.
Just picking that back up. So we just finished talking about Conor Benn and kind of his return. Obviously, that main aim is to get Conor Benn a big fight at on February 3rd in the UK. But obviously, moving on now to two, in my opinion, two of the most active and two of the most kind of consistent prospects in impressing the boxing audience in MaiseyRose Courtney and George Liddard. Obviously, both had 4 fights this year and both continuing to impress you. Obviously, your dad Tony Sims and yourself, obviously, very impressed with those how Maisie and George have progressed this year.
Yeah, super impressed. We knew they were going to be good prospects. We knew that part of the key of developing prospects is keeping them busy, and that's in the gym and on fight night. So we've kept them very busy with Matchroom. We struck a deal that sees these guys developing very well. They're getting the right step ups when they need them. I think George was feeling a little bit burnt out in his probably his last performance, and he needed a bit of a break. So he's been non-stop training in camp, and he's been sparring some of the bigger names in and around that Matchroom gym, and being very active on the Matchroom event circuit as well promotionally. So he just needed a bit of a break, and that was understandable. So he's been given a nice break, and he'll be ready for a big 2024. Great prospect, super strong, super mature for his age. He's going to be a really, really exciting name in that division. He just needs the right time to develop, and he's going to be given that opportunity certainly in 2024. But expect to see and hear George Liddard's name a lot in 2024. And I think same with MaiseyRose. She's such a big personality and so likable. Everybody loves her. She was the perfect woman for us to come in, train in the Matchroom gym, and she's brought a whole new lease of life there. She's super key in terms of that team, and she's been great. She's got a really good amateur pedigree. She's shown that certainly in the last 4 fights that she's technically very good. There's certainly some improvements to come, but she's extremely game. She'll come in and she'll fight as well as box. And she's in and around a really good time for women's boxing. We're kind of looking at that new era. We've seen Katie Taylor kind of coming towards the end of her era now, and she's been flying the flag for a long time and giving all of these kind of women the platform and the opportunities they need to go and showcase their skills. But MaiseyRose in particularly, who's been inspired by Katie Taylor, she's certainly going to be a big name for us in London. And I think we need kind of those big fights in and around London. She's in an interesting weight category because there really isn't a lot of depth to it, but there are some good fights in and around it. So it could be a case that she has to move up at some point. So natural names there are like Shannon Ryan and those kind of fights. But in due course, I'm sure they'll come around, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of titles on the line. But right now, she's developing very well, and she needs to keep up her momentum. So she'll be busy in 2024. And another name, Jimmy Sains, who's he's a new recruit in terms of publicly, but I think everybody knows he was the best kept secret in boxing. He'd been working and training with Tony Sims for at least a couple of years in and around that Matchroom gym. He'd had a really good run with his amateur pedigree since then. He did get a call up to go on Team GB. He was there, but he decided to turn pro, and that was really down to Tony Sims trying to keep him as long as he could, try and get his maturity levels to improve in terms of physicality. But I mean, that guy can punch. Like, that guy can really punch. He's got that crazy one punch knockout power. Tony's super excited about him. I think he's gonna really spend some time developing him. You can see something special in him, and he's going to be a really exciting name throughout 2024. We see a little flash of him towards the back end of 2023, but 24 is going to be huge for Jaimie Sains. So get used to seeing that name as well.
Definitely. I just want to go back to Maisie and obviously you mentioned titles might be towards the end of 2024 for Maisie, but for George, could we see maybe especially an English title eliminator or an English title? Obviously, I know Brad Pauls is fighting John Harding Jr. Could maybe the winner of that be the title holder for that be a potential for George Liddard next year?
Definitely, like those kind of names, Brad Pauls, John Harding Jr., like they're the perfect names that are going to be really good step ups for him in terms of the levels. You know, them guys have been fighting at 10 and 12 round fights. And you know, he's gonna wanna come and go probably the traditional route. He's very young still, so he's gonna want to do it all properly. Tony Sims is a big he's very fond of the traditional route. He likes going if area, English, British, Commonwealth, European, then on to World Championship. He did the same with Darren Barker back in the day, who was a top middleweight for us. So he'll be looking to take that traditional route with George, and I think George is going to be super exciting. A huge fan base. Him and Jaimie Sains could both sell out, an arena alone just with them two on the undercard. So George is definitely going to be bringing that Essex crowd. Jaimie Sains as well. So, them two in particularly are going to be super exciting. But I'm excited about George. He's got a lot of good attributes for a young fighter. He can box, he can fight, he's strong, he's game. He's definitely improved on his defense, which was one of the biggest things. His footwork, his rolling, like everything that I watched him working on a year 18 months ago, he's kind of been really stepping up and improving in his fight. So I think we've got a really good 2024 coming for George Liddard. He's a very exciting prospect.
Definitely, and I just want to go back to Jimmy as well. Obviously, I imagine the main aim for him is to basically carry on the activity that Maisie and George had this year into 2024 for Jimmy as well.
Right. And I think Jimmy's still maturing physically. Like, I think there could be he could definitely in the next year or two go up in weight class. Just kind of need to monitor his body and figure out exactly where he's going to be. But he's got the power, that's for sure. And it's just about teaching him the rest. But Tony Sims has put a lot of time into Jimmy, and he has done over the last couple of years. I think he's going to transition very quickly from an amateur to pro. And I think he always had that pro style. And I think that kind of stalled him a little bit in the amateurs where he'd been working with and around that gym. He went for the ABAs. He came up short against Dan Toward in the ABAs, and Dan Toward's now turned pro. But I think realistically, Jimmy has probably the style to be a very, very good pro. And I think he's, just carries that power as well. He stopped a lot of kids in the amateurs, which is very, very rare. You very rarely see, you might see one here and there, but to do it consistently is very, 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 very difficult. And he did it consistently. So I think we're going to see a very good Jaimie Sains coming through, but he needs that. He needs a solid year in the pros. 2024 is going to be important for him. Going to follow in the footsteps of George and Maisie, stay very, very busy, probably box around the country. I'd like to see him box internationally as well, just gain some experience in the US if that opportunity arises. But for me, Jaimie Sains is going to be a very, very, very special talent and one to watch.
He definitely is, and you talk about selling tickets. I think the funniest thing to come out of Jaimie Sains' debut is that Eddie Hearn's daughter buying a ticket off Jimmy without realizing that it was her dad's show. I think that's absolutely hilarious. I love that story.
Yeah,
I
part of that new era, right? When you've got Eddie Hearn's daughter now buying tickets. I remember Eddie Hearn's daughter when she was like really young, and now she's of an age where she's out and about, and she's buying tickets to fights with people like Jimmy and George and Maisie, all being around the same age. They're the kind of the new era coming through. So it's exciting, and I think this is what Matchroom Gym in the UK has done very, very well. They've got a very good system of cycling fighters. When you look at kind of the original opener of Matchroom Gym, and it was like Darren Barker, Kevin Mitchell, Ricky Burns, which then transitioned into, Anthony Joshua, John Ryder, Joe Cordina shortly after that, which then transitioned into Felix Cash, Ted Cheeseman, Martin Ward was around, Conor Benn. He was at one point, I've had multiple conversations with Conor Benn where he was like, there was a point where I was the youngest in the gym, and now I'm one of the senior members in this gym. And, he's now going to be giving advice and being around people. And same with Cordina. He's a great person to look up to in that gym. He's going to be giving advice to George Liddard, Jimmy Sains, MaiseyRose Courtney. Like, they're going to be looking up at them guys. And at some point in the near future, they're going to be the seniors in that gym. And there's going to be a whole new crop coming in after them, where they'll be looking up to them. And it may be that we're talking about Jimmy or George or Maisie being a world champion at that point. And I think this is what's made that gym very successful. This is what's kept Tony Sims at the top of his game for many, many years. And I think that's what's really made that gym iconic in the UK, and arguably the best gym that we have in the UK in terms of team and structure. So, I'm very excited to see where them prospects go, but I'm also excited to see what's next. Who's going to come in after these guys, and who's going to be the next part of the new era.
Definitely, it is exciting. It's exciting things to come for the Matchroom Gym in 2024. I do want to move on to two of the Berkeley boys that you manage as well. Obviously, start with Cyrus Pattinson. Obviously, fight of the year contender against Chris Jenkins at the start of the year. I was ringside for that. I mean, that fight, it wasn't supposed to be that good. I think it's one of my fights of the year this year. Then obviously, unfortunately, lost to Connor Walker, but in a fight where, in my opinion anyway, some people might disagree, but I don't think his stock necessarily decreased after that. Okay, he lost, like you said, with John. Losing isn't great, but he lost in a fight where he kept trying to win, even when he got dropped multiple times. And it's looking likely, the rumours are circulating, that he's rematching Connor Walker in February as well.
Right. So, yeah, great fight against Jenkins. Wasn't supposed to be like that. Was supposed to be a bit of a level up, certainly, but obviously Jenkins has been around for a long time, former British champion, very experienced, knows his way around the ring. I thought that we were going to see Jenkins decline as the rounds went on, certainly past the halfway point. I think was probably what everybody was thinking, and he just didn't. I think actually the inexperience of Cyrus probably kicked in, and the experience of Jenkins probably kicked in at that point, and we started to see some shifts. I thought Cyrus ended that fight very strong, and was super happy to see him get the win and a fight of the year contender. Put him on the map, certainly in the Northeast. I think people started to realize when you buy a Cyrus Pattinson ticket, you're going for a great event and a great fight, and that's kind of what made the Ritson fight very interesting. Could he fight Lewis Ritson? What would that do for Northeast boxing? Could that sell out an arena, maybe a smaller version of a stadium? How big can we go here? So it was like, let's explore that fight, but let's get another one in between, which again, we need to go through the levels here. Ritson's just coming off the back of a world title eliminator, and Jenkins was a former British champion. Let's try and bridge the gap with somebody a bit more current. Connor Walker was obviously a name that was presented to us. Very good fighter. I wasn't shocked that he was going to be strong, and he was going to be in a good fight with him. So when they both got matched up, I thought that Cyrus's amateur pedigree and his technical boxing was going to really get him through that fight. And for me, and talking to him and his team, that was always the plan. It wasn't necessarily let's go toe to toe with him and see who catches who first. It was a bit more of a let's fight on our back foot. Let's use our boxing experience. Let's use that kind of Team GB pedigree, and let's use the jab and start putting the shots together. And then hopefully by the end of the back end of the fight, we can start going through the gears with Connor Walker. But didn't pan out like that. and that's just boxing. And sometimes that happens. What I will say is, and what I do love about what Matchroom have been promoting recently, is that if you're in good fights and you are willing to put everything on the line, you will get the opportunity to come back. And this isn't necessarily about losing your own and then you being finished, released, and never spoken about or heard from again. You will get the opportunity to come back, and you will get the opportunity to rewrite that wrong. And for me, Cyrus Pattinson is definitely the better fighter out of him and Conor Walker. I think we see flashes of it in the fight. He got caught early. I think it was the second round, and it was a bit of a heavy knockdown. He didn't look like he had recovered, but what he didn't do consistently is go back to basics and back to boxing. And when he did do it, he kind of kept the distance very easily with Conor Walker. He used his jab, put shots together nicely in those nice combinations, body to head, and he was kind of winning the rounds quite comfortably. It was only when he got himself into a dogfight with Conor Walker that he just seemed to be getting second best in it. And that was kind of Conor Walker's game plan. He was coming up. He was a shorter man. He was going to come forward and try and spoil the party, and he did. And I think we're in very late negotiations to make that fight now, for February the 10th. And when that fight does get agreed and announced, I think Cyrus Pattinson and his team are going to have to get a game plan. They're going to have to come back, and they're going to have to rewrite the wrong. So I appreciate, one, Cyrus wanting to take this fight. Could have been a conversation about taking another fight in between. And I did have that conversation with him, but he felt very strongly that he wanted to go back into this fight. His team wanted him to go back into this fight. So, props to him for taking on this. Props to Matchroom for realizing and understanding that good fights do make sense, and that putting this fight as a headline again, whether it be in the Midlands or the Northeast, would certainly put a lot of bums on seats. And again, Cyrus Pattinson, when you buy a ticket to watch him fight, you know what you're in for. And I think him versus Conor Walker too is going to be a very exciting fight.
It definitely is, and I for one, I'm looking forward to it again. And like you said, you buy a ticket to see Cyrus Pattinson, and you get entertainment as well. The other Berkeley boy who you manage, obviously Calum French. Obviously, he had another one fight. We had two fights this year. One against Jordan Ellison, but then also unfortunately lost to Jeff Afori. Obviously, I think Eddie was fairly harsh but fair in his post fight criticism. Not good enough against Jeff Afori the other week, but obviously rumored to be back out on that February the 10th card, and I'm not sure if it's a rematch against Jeff Afori, but could we see that next?
Yeah, again, one of many conversations I've been having with Calum French is, what went wrong there, because for me, Jeff Afori is just isn't of the level of Calum French. Calum French really and truly should have been an Olympian, and if it weren't for his weight category being removed, he would have gone to the Olympics. And he's been in and around that Team GB, world level amateur circuit for a long time. He's been in with everybody in and around his weight. He's medaled at multiple tournaments. He was one of the most exciting prospects that I've probably came out of British boxing for a while. I was super excited to work with him. I thought he was going to set the world on fire, but unfortunately, he's just had a few injury problems, and that's really been stalling his career. He's had a bad shoulder, and he just hasn't been able to train properly with it. But he's like one of these personalities that he just won't mention it, and he just won't tell you until the fight's done. And we did it with the fight before Jeff Afori. Actually, he had an injury before that fight. He wasn't sparring. I think he did 1 week's worth of sparring throughout the whole camp. He wasn't actually throwing that, using that arm, which is his lead arm. And he went into the fight and barely got through it. He managed to get a win, but it wasn't a good performance at all. And he turned around and said to me, I've got a shoulder problem here. I need to go and get operated on. But I just wanted to, one, didn't want to miss this opportunity to fight, and two, didn't want to lose any momentum. but ultimately he didn't really come out good looking, looking good in the fight. And I think actually would have probably done him a favor not to have fought and got himself back to full health. That's probably what I would have advised him had I known more about that at the time. And I said to him, I wish I'd known at the time. But anyway, he did go and get a shoulder operation, and he has been rehabilitating now for the last 7 months, which is why we've seen him kind of inconsistently fighting. And again, it was like that opportunity came around in Newcastle, and he was on home turf, and he wanted to get back out there, and he told me that he was in full health and he was ready to go. And Jeff Ofori, experienced, yes, technically good, probably not. Thought he was going to give him some good rounds, but should have really been a breeze in terms of a points decision at least. A stoppage towards the back end of the fight was probably what we was expecting. But again, looked sharp for the first few rounds, and then just fizzled out. And Jeff Ofori just used his experience, kept walking him down, kept coming, wasn't technically faster or hitting harder, or he was just getting the better of the exchanges. And it was a bad night for Calum French. I spoke to him about it, and he told me that he had the injury again, and he spoke to his surgeon, who said to him that you need to rehabilitate it again because the Feb 10th card is coming up. And he said, I don't know if I'm going to be ready for Feb 10th, but I want to rematch Jeff Ofori. Is there any way we can potentially make that fight when I'm back to full health? So again, another one that just didn't know about, and had I known about it, I think I would have probably pulled him out, because I just don't think it's worth risking it, to be honest with you. But we had the conversation too late. The fight happened, didn't look good, got a lot of criticism for it. He hasn't come out and told anybody publicly that he was injured for that fight and that he couldn't really train or spar in camp. But, that's 2 back-to-back fights now where this has happened. And let's be real and honest, and you'll know this, he'll get his opportunity again, because Matchroom will probably turn around and say, we'll give you an opportunity to rewrite the wrong. But the truth is, he's going to be fighting for his career now against Jeff Ofori. And I think if he doesn't win against Jeff Ofori, then you probably have to close the chapter of professional boxing. And that's a tough conversation to have with somebody who has basically been boxing for a majority of their life and hasn't, was an accomplished amateur, but hasn't accomplished anything that he thought he was going to accomplish in the pro game. But I think he's got, with full health, full camp, he'll come and beat Jeff Ofori, but he's got to be on point, and he's got to be fully fit. He's got to have had a good camp, because that just shows you, without having a good camp, what can happen. And he needs to come back, and he needs to beat Jeff Ofori.
Definitely. Well, two very important rematches for both Cyrus Pattinson and Calum French in the new year. Obviously, injury dependent as well. Just to finish, Charlie, I do want to touch on obviously some exciting news that yourself, Matchroom and Churchill Boxing in the States announced. Obviously, you've all partnered and you've opened the Matchroom Churchill Gym in Santa Monica. I mean, in exciting times to kind of bring kind of the Matchroom Gym kind of name from not only just in Essex now, but also over to stateside as well. It's an exciting time.
Right. And we were talking about this previously, the successful model that Matchroom Gym has built, the structure that's been put in place, and the cycling of good fighters coming through consistently. That's something that we're trying to replicate here in LA. And been looking, had the thought process that I could potentially do something here. Had to be the right facility, had to be the right partnership, had to be the right team. Matchroom had to get on board. There were a lot of things that had to come together in order to make this happen. And we used Churchill's gym for the John Ryder Canelo camp, and we was familiar with it. Pedro, the head coach there, very accommodating, very welcoming, made me feel like home a little bit. It's got that kind of old school sweat and sawdust gym to it, similar to the one that we have back home in the UK. And I just felt very comfortable, felt like I was watching a very young version of my father, like he was just training non-stop. He does crazy hours. He's got that old school mentality. He's got the respect from the fighters, which I think is super important. And he actually just really wants to do well. And he just wants to build it into something really, really great. And the owner and founder of that gym, Peter Berg, who's a huge Hollywood director, made some amazing movies, has a huge passion for boxing. In terms of the people that he knows and can get in and around that gym, he's super passionate about driving that gym forward and having people base themselves there and building that kind of grassroots, getting those kind of prospects into contenders, into champions mindset. And I just know from experience what it takes to build a gym like that. I've worked really closely with my dad to develop Matchroom Boxing Gym UK. I know the kind of team that you have to put in place around the head coach. I know what kind of fighters it takes to walk through the door and become of a certain level of where the Matchroom Gym has to be. And we just got our heads together, and it just kind of made sense with Matchroom. They're definitely making a big splash in the US. With the zone, they've kind of come in, and whether the other US promoters like it or not, they're arguably putting on the best events with the best fighters consistently. And it's just for them, to have that kind of facility where they know they can position fighters who might not have coaches or managers, or might be coming through the system and looking for some really good sparring or just another home, or if their relationship's broken down with their current facility, or they need to move away from their current hometown to get out of that environment, that they've got another home. And I think that's what Matchroom Gym UK did really well. That this is what Matchroom LA is going to do really, really well with as well. So super excited to partner with them. It just shows you that Matchroom have a huge long-term vision in the sport, and that they're going to be making huge waves in the US. And I think it's a really exciting market. I've been here for a year now, full time. I've kind of been working across many different projects, but this being the most exciting for me. I think we can build a really, really good team and make Matchroom US very iconic, especially on the West Coast here. And one of the biggest differences that I've seen with Matchroom UK and Matchroom US is that Matchroom UK is a house of fundamentals to the best UK fighters. And what I'm seeing in the US is we're seeing the best of around the world. These guys are coming from all over, South America, East Asia, Russia, East Europe, all over the place. And I think there's a really good opportunity to expand with some international and global fighters, which is part of my plans, really. That's what I wanted to do. I felt like I'd done a really good job in the UK, working with certainly some of the best fighters in and around the UK, making big fights consistently. And I want to be on that kind of global map. I want to be recognized globally as well as one of the best advisors. And this was part of my plan. And now I can see it coming together. It's super exciting.
You definitely have, Charlie, and it just showed obviously the year that we've discussed with your fighters. Obviously, it's going to continue to grow in 2024 as well. That was my final question, Charlie. Do we final words? Maybe any teasing some new signings for the Matchroom Gym, maybe. But yeah, any last words to finish off the interview, mate?
Definitely some big signings coming for 2024. There's going to be a lot happening, certainly around the amateur circuit. Obviously, we have the Olympics coming up, so we're going to be working hard in and around that to try and nail down some Olympians, whether they're going to be UK and US. But I think more importantly, we're going to see some really good stuff coming into UK gym, but also going to be working very hard to get some really good prospects and contenders come into the US gym. And by the end of 2024, I want to see more world titles. I want to see more big fights. I want to see more mandatory positions, and I want to see our prospects turning into contenders. That's the goal here, and just to keep cycling. That's what we do. We're very, very good at it. We're good at bringing in new crops of talent and watching them guys and girls kind of develop into what they need to be. So, be excited for 2024. I think not just for me. I think actually boxing as a whole is going to be huge for 2024. I think, we've got British boxing, no doubt, consistently putting on the best shows, in my opinion, globally. And then we've got the US that seems to be making some really big fights. I think we've had some really, really good fights this year in the US for pay-per-view events. But with Saudi stepping in and making a big splash, not only on these big events, but it looks like they're going to be doing more events consistently. It's just so good for the market. It just brings another big player in. And very interesting to see where 2024 leads us. But for any general boxing fan, for anybody in the business, we should be super excited for where boxing is right now, because the big fights seem like they're getting made. And this has been one of the biggest problems for us. You know, the big fights never get made in boxing. There's too many politics. Well, now we're starting to see the big fights get made. And I'm very, very excited to be in and around that for 2024.
Definitely, and we look forward to seeing it as well. And I hope I get to visit the Churchill Matchroom Gym in Santa Monica at some point.
Anytime you want to come, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And again, thank you very much for this interview. And I hope you have a lovely Christmas as well, mate.
And you talk soon, mate.